Welcome to Mad Men, a podcast dedicated to recapping and analyzing the AMC series Mad Men from the perspective of three wildly different types of watchers. We've got someone watching the show for the very first time. The person who rewatches the show for the first time isn't here, unfortunately, but there is me, Jon Negroni, who rewatches this show at least once a year. And for this episode, I won't be celebrating Christmas. I'll be celebrating Pearl Harbor Day. And of course, we have our first-time watcher, and that is, as always, Will Ashton. And Will, go back to podcasting this minute.
Hey, I just wanted to say Happy Easter.
That's right. This episode came out May 12th, 2012, even though it's a Christmas episode.
Okay,
yeah.
I was saying that because it would be fitting for us to say Merry Christmas because it's December 12th. But this episode probably won't come out until somewhere between Easter and Memorial Day. So
Right.
That's
2027.
Yeah, maybe of 2027. Maybe 2028. You don't know.
No, wow, that's pretty far. Thank you so much for tuning in for Mad Men. Yeah, unfortunately, Mike Overhulse, who is our usual rewatcher, he can't make it. He's been traveling quite a lot, and that's one of the reasons why it can be a little tough to schedule things, and we of course don't want to miss a lot of episodes with him in it. Also, apologies if you can't tell from my voice. I'm a little bit under the weather. So my voice is a little shot. So Will Ashton, we're going to have to rely on your smoothness, your clarity to walk us through this waltz. I'm going to be stumbling and stepping on toes.
That's great because this is an episode I saw a couple days ago, and I have done less research than normal. So this is going to be a lot of fun for everybody.
Well, you did read the chapter in Mad Men Carousel, which we'll probably get to in a minute, but some context for this episode. This is season 5, episode 10, Christmas Waltz. It was directed by Michael Appendahl, of course, who has directed many episodes of Mad Men. He, earlier this season, directed At the Codfish Ball. That was episode 7. And Appendahl is one of the directors I really like to hear when he's on the commentaries. He's on this one with Matthew Weiner, who co-wrote this episode with Victor Levin. Victor Levin co-wrote Mystery Date earlier this season with Matthew Weiner as well. Now, for this episode, there's a lot to get to. I already mentioned it's May 20th, 2012 is when this aired. Little strange for, a Christmas episode. That's probably why the ratings this is like a season 5 ratings low. So the season kicked off with like a series high of 3.54 million. And then it kind of trickled down to 2.94, 2.75, all the way down to 2.13. It's been like a steady decline ever since the first episode of season 5. Dark Shadows was the last episode. It was at 2.13. It trickled down again here to Christmas Waltz at 1.92, but it's going to be trickling back up before the season ends. And so one thing to keep in mind is that one of the reasons probably that a lot of shows tend to not really do holiday themed episodes because it just creates this problem where people do kind of like check out, or, I'm speculating, of course. I don't know why. Maybe it's May 20th. It's also Memorial Day. People are out of town doing stuff like that in 2012. I don't know. Big presidential election coming up later that year. Maybe stuff was on people's minds for all I know. But yeah, just speculating.
I don't know. I do have a soft spot for holiday themed episodes that don't come out on their intended holiday. I know right now there's like a running theme with Smiling Friends where they have like a Halloween episode each season, but they never come out on Halloween. And this year they had a chance to release it on the week of Halloween, and they deliberately missed that week so that it would come out after Halloween. So I like stuff like that. It's fun. Yeah,
and I liked how Community kind of decided to do, like, they did a Halloween episode once on like Valentine's Day or something like that, because that was like season 4, the gas leak year. So not unheard of for sure.
I mean, that's also the what was the day that like isn't actually October something for Community?
What's October? Not a day? What?
Well, because there's a whole thing where like I think it was the 5th season of Community was supposed to come out like October 15th, and it got delayed, so you had that video where it's like October 15th isn't a date, it's an idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
they always did fun stuff like that. They did like these were like little ads that they would do, like. Sometimes it would only be on like Hulu, because that was like the running joke of like most people watch us on a streaming service and the age before streaming services. Actually, speaking of that, that's a pretty decent segue into, as we record this, Mad Men has recently hit HBO Max. That was news before the whole Netflix buying Warner Brothers thing. There's a lot of like consternation and a lot of talk happening right now with people watching or rewatching Mad Men for the first time, or first time in a while. And I think that plays a little bit into, there's been some more interest in the show. We've been having more people listening and writing in. So, it's a good opportunity for people to check out our back catalog. Hopefully we can get through season 7 for folks, because they do like to binge Mad Men, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I saw that, I was like, hey, this may seem like a good opportunity to get the podcast rolling, maybe release a couple episodes. And Jon famously said, don't you dare talk to me, especially when you're not on a mic. And I said, okay, point taken.
Which, by the way, for another little fun fact, is our group chat for the podcast as of this past week is now the Negron Complex, which I refuse to make that my little Zoom username, which I know Will is expecting and probably shaking his head when he saw that wasn't the case. But
yeah, I was genuinely mad.
Well,
I had to maintain my anger for the politeness of this conversation.
If I did do it, I would have done the Negron John. Try to mix it up a little bit.
The complex Negroni.
The complex John. The John complex. Anyway, the Christmas Waltz is the featured music here, Doris Day, hence the title of the episode. I want to get your read on this one, Will, because this is a pretty important episode. This features the return of Paul Kinsey. Michael Gladys comes back to the show. You'll recall in our interview with Brian Batt from who plays Sal, of course, when he was talking about, if he would ever come back to Mad Men, or he said he had a conversation with Michael Gladys, and he was referencing this episode when he came back. Obviously, we're not going to spoil anything because Will is still fresh to the show. He's watching it for the first time. But Will, there you go. This is what Brian was talking about in terms of when Gladys told him that story about how he was like, honestly, it's kind of like hooking up with your ex, when you come back. And some of the commentary on, specifically, there's an actor's commentary with Michael Gladys and Jared Harris and Rich Sommer, which one of my favorite actors commentaries of the season, maybe the entire series so far, because they are just cracking each other up. I didn't realize how much Rich Sommer and Michael Gladys were really good friends at this point, and they have a really good banter. And they talk a lot about what it was like to have Michael back and some of the stuff they put him through. Apparently, one of the early conversations he had was one of the producers, I think Scott Hornbacher, he said, was like, "So, can you shave your head?" And Michael Gladys is like, yeah, of course. And he was like, but they didn't give him any context for it being a Hare Krishna thing. But yeah, it's cool to have him back. I hope you agree.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we discussed, I think that the last time we saw him, which I think was shut down, have a seat, or sit down, have a seat, or shut the door.
Shut the door, have a seat was the the third season finale. That was his last appearance on the show.
But they highlighted him. I remember they focused on him longer than the other people that we left behind. So there was kind of the idea of okay, maybe they like him a little bit more. Maybe there's something that they feel like is left unsaid about this character. I don't know.
I think part of it was, I mean, he had been on the show since season 1. I think there was this lingering question, especially when they brought Aaron Stanton back as Ken. I think they probably wanted to leave it up in the air of maybe he does come back. Maybe he, even if it's only for an episode or two. And, Weiner talked about how they did discuss a lot of different options to have him back. And I think Gladys talked about we talked about it too. And ultimately he's like, I didn't expect this. I didn't expect it to be this weird. I remember how surreal it was watching it for the first time and being like, this is how you bring him back? Because, it's Paul Kinsey. He'd been around. He had been one of the side characters who'd gotten plenty of B plots over the years. It wasn't like he was a bit player, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, I don't think they focus on him quite as in depth, but I remember, I forget, did you watch Girls?
Yeah. But not the whole thing. I think the first 3 seasons or so.
Okay. I just remember they also, Christopher, what's his name? I'm blanking on his name, unfortunately.
Oh, Chris Abbott?
Chris Abbott, yeah. Great actor. And, they dropped him around the third or second or third season, even though he was from the beginning. And then they kind of brought him back for a 5th season thing. And he's kind of a different guy than what we saw before, but we get to learn from him and kind of see how pivotal he was to, Marnie's character and all this stuff. And it's one of my favorite episodes of the show. And it kind of reminded me of that, just a sense of okay, we're kind of and it feels very much like life in both episodes. The idea of you're really close to somebody and then circumstances, you move, school ends, something happens and you separate and then you kind of reconnect later in life and you're both, similar but different people. And then how that kind of informs the relationship moving forward. Yeah, I always like when shows do stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm sort of half speculating here, but half extrapolating from stuff that Weiner has said before, which is that he really finds it more realistic when he finds ways for characters to kind of come and go, because that's real life. And there's a tension between that and when you're making a TV show. And you start to like get into this rhythm of like it's these same characters who kind of become this family. And then you start to there's a tension between the realism of that, or in some ways it's a bit of a fantasy. Because there's so many TV shows where like the workplace becomes like the main home for these characters. And so people kind of coming and going starts to break the immersion, but it also starts to break the immersion when they become so codependent that you can't let any of them go. So I think sometimes they try to be strategic with this, showrunners and writers, like who can we kind of like throw around. I think the third season had to have a bit of a shakeup, and they had to make some choices on not everybody can just come back, because then otherwise it's just Sterling Cooper again. It's like the same deal. So they wanted to like refresh things and bring in new talent. I also think with certain characters, like they won't say this out loud, but I think they just run out of story for people. And I think they ran out of story with Paul Kinsey in a way that they didn't quite with Ken Cosgrove, only because Ken and Pete had this kind of like drama and tension that was like still there and still had so much to explore. Whereas with Paul, I feel like they tried that with Joan. It didn't quite work. Their like romantic history just it didn't really spark as well as like all the stuff she has with Roger. And then Paul has this thing with Peggy, which they tried out in the third season, but she just outshines him so much that I just think that they didn't see a lot of room there to explore more with his character, which of course isn't Michael Gladys's fault because he always did a really good job with the character. But yeah, I think it's fitting, even though it's a little sad.
Yeah, and I mean, a big thing with Paul's character too is just the idea of like he's sort of a man who's kind of out of step but wants to be connected with the times, and like you have already a number of characters like that in the show, albeit not maybe of that age bracket, but like it's more fascinating to see like somebody like, you know, Pete, who is like of that age but actively rejecting the progression in the favor of like progressing his career. But like he's like not trying to be of the times of the 60s. He like kind of wants to maintain that you know, sort of he's workman like mentality, and you know, seems to be working to for him to some extent. But like Paul Kinsey is someone who is like he wants to be socially progressive. He wants to be somebody who's like, you know, dating black women and like kind of like of the times. And so like it's really fun to see him in the Hare Krishna movement. But yeah, I agree with you in the sense of like I don't know if there's a whole lot of opportunities to explore that in a way it doesn't feel repetitive. But I also like seeing that character, and I feel like, you know, it's nice to see if this is truly the last time we see him, which it feels very definitively like a goodbye for the character. So I mean, I haven't seen the rest of the show, so I don't know if they find a way to squeeze him in, but it does feel like this is kind of like his send off in a kind of fitting and touching sort of way.
Well, let's give a quick overview of the rest of the episode, and then I want to get your thoughts on the episode as a whole. So we have a couple other there's not a huge A plot here. I think the A plot is probably Lane's story, and Don kind of shares a B plot here with Joan, and then we also have the Harry and Paul stuff. So it's an interesting episode in that respect, very ensemble this week. But yeah, the big one here is Lane Price. The episode opens with him. He is dealing with some significant money problems. I'm definitely curious what your read on that is going to be. For Don and Joan, the main thing with Don here is that he's still kind of grieving Megan leaving the firm and having to literally contend with all of these like anti-advertising, like this anti-advertising movement that's happening, and carrying that over to how he feels about what's going on with Megan. I can't wait to talk about that play with you, by the way. And then yes, we have Joan getting served the divorce papers from Mr. Greg or Sergeant Greg, whatever his maybe he's a corporal. I don't remember. He's something. He's something all right. And also Jaguar is back in the mix.
You know, very anachronistic, the You Got Served thing, because that wasn't until 2005 when, you know, people were popping locking, you know, for that, you know, just having, yeah, John, I can see his disappointment in his face. My attempt to make a You Got Served joke in the year of our Lord 2025.
I was just waiting for the shoe to drop, to be honest with you.
Yeah. John's like, I'm too sick for these sick jokes.
There you go. Yeah, so an interesting episode to be sure. I know it's been a while since we talked about Dark Shadows, but yeah, I'm curious how you're feeling about this one, especially as we're nearing the end of season 5. We only have 3 episodes left. How do you feel this episode lands for you, especially in that context?
I liked it. I feel like it's, you know, I think I've said already that the 5th season's probably my favorite so far. I don't think it's like the top of the pack, necessarily, but I think there's a lot of stuff to like in it, and I think in terms of the overlapping themes, I got more out of reading Matt Dillerslice's chapter in the Mad Men Carousel to kind of get a greater appreciation of how these are all sort of connected, and not to say that I thought they were disparate or like at odds with each other, but I think he's well aware of the sort of nuances of the show, and in that chapter, because you can kind of tell that like the more you read into the book, you can tell like he's kind of like taking the Vulture or New York Magazine or whatever reviews they wrote at the time and kind of incorporating them into the book. But this one felt like he actually was like kind of going back and like editing it to reflect the where the show is, but also not spoiling anything. And so this chapter felt a little bit more enriched in that respect. Like it felt like he kind of had a more authorial hand in it, I guess. But in any case, yeah, no, I liked it. I was happy to see Lane again. I feel like we haven't really caught up with him much this season. He's kind of been in the background a lot.
Yeah, he's popped up every once in a while, here and there. But you're right. He had like the big thing with Pete, back in, I think it was Signal 30 when he punches him out and everything. And I think he had his embarrassing moment with Joan. But it is interesting to see like a year ago around Christmas time, right? Or New Year's, he and Don were in like totally different places, right? Like Lane had his wife was estranged with their child, like over in the UK. And a year later, now she's in New York. She wants to make a go of it. And it seems like things have really turned around, but he has this money problem, which I'll admit when I first watched it, I was like, so what is because they don't specify it exactly, or at least they don't over explain it, I guess. But Weiner gets into a little bit, but basically it's like Lane didn't really pay his taxes.
Yeah, I thought it was some sort of tax thing with like
specifically when they got bought.
Yeah.
When they got bought out their contracts, the money they got for basically Sterling Cooper and doing all that stuff. And one of the reasons he didn't pay his taxes is because they almost went under a year earlier is the connotation, right? He couldn't afford it. Oh, obviously that's a loose end. By the end of this episode, it's looking like, the obvious, like, okay, what's going to happen? How is he going to try to get out of this next? Especially he's in a serious jam. And I think like Jaguar kind of hangs over this because like Don has the whole moment where he goes to Jaguar and, poor Pete is like, how come nobody's excited about Jaguar being part of the firm? Like everyone's kind of looking at him like, oh, okay, sure. And Bert kind of says it best. He's like, they're lemons. They don't start.
Yeah,
Don's like,
so funny.
This car does nothing for me.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm not very well versed in the, world of cars, so I don't know. Was Jaguar really that popular prior to the events of this episode?
Well, Ashton, historically, who else has watched Pixar's Cars more than you?
Sure,
besides me.
I know. Yeah.
No, I mean, well, they did have this reputation, and I think for story purposes, I mean, Lane Price is Jaguar. It's a British car, and it is kind of like a rejection of Lane Price, and this kind of like on the surface, everything looks put together, but in practice, it's falling apart, right? And so even though, Ed, obviously like Pete seems to be the most oblivious one about it, right? And then I think there's a reason he's kind of like, in this episode, he's a bit more of the comedic relief, which I guess isn't that weird. He's the comedic relief in an episode where Michael Gladys shaved his head and tries to recruit people into a semi-cult. But yeah, I'm glad to hear you liked the episode. I want to, read a little bit from Emily St. James' review on the AV Club. She gave it an A- at the time. Wrote a really lovely write-up about it. I'm going to read a little small part of it. She wrote, the characters on Mad Men, of course, are infected by the chronic sense of wanting something more, but also something ill-defined. Their lives are in a constant quicksand that keeps dragging them downward, and they think if they just get that nice new thing or land that shiny new account, they might drag themselves out. But the only way to escape quicksand is to relax and let it do its thing, float on top until it releases you. Yet even the characters who attempt to do that very thing find themselves sucked down by their desires. These people can't stop wanting things. Their whole job is to make everybody want everything. I thought it was a really nice summation of the season, to be honest with you.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Yeah, I would agree.
So in that respect, then, I want to talk about the Don stuff maybe. If we can go into the Don stuff. They go see American Hurrah, which I was curious. Did you know of that play before, or had you ever been aware of it?
I've heard the name. I didn't know much about the material of it. It's like a very famous 60s, like semi-new age kind of play.
Yeah, very avant-garde for the time especially. And funny enough, Matthew Weiner was in that play. or he performed in that play when he was living in New York. And he said, or I think he said it was when he was living in New York. And he said that literally the part that they shoot where we watch the guy kind of like talking about how he's watching the beer ads and he throws up. Matthew Weiner did that. Like that was his part in the play that they ended up shooting and doing. And then
makes sense.
And Uppendahl took special note of like Don's face during that whole thing. He's like kind of cringing the entire time. It made me think about all the memes of like Don in the movie theater and how this is like the kind of opposite that you could use. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's a man of the movies, not a man of the theater.
Right.
I mean, has he? We've seen him in the theater a few times, like at the plays. Has he ever really enjoyed himself watching like live theater that you can recall?
That's a good question. You know, for some reason, the thing I'm thinking of is like he had a kind of a similar reaction in Maidenform when they had like the fashion show.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, the live performance, I think he does have some kind of like, he's a little unsettled by, I guess, in a way that there could be some area there.
I mean, there is a sense like obviously he's always performing in some respect, but I think he kind of likes a more controlled environment, which maybe is why he prefers film and TV versus theater, which, you know, to, I think, quote David Chen, like there's blood in the water when there's like live theater and there's like a spontaneity that maybe he's uncomfortable with or something that he's like not like comfortable addressing in some way, or maybe he just doesn't really care for his place. I don't really know.
I like both interpretations, to be honest. That sounds great. So yeah, in his whole thing too is, you know, he has this whole outing with Joan. I really appreciated it. I think it's very like, I think it's kind of nice to see the two characters sort of bonding. And, you know, did you take it like, I'll say first time watcher, when I was first watching it, I took it as platonic and in a sense of like, they see each other as siblings, right? And there's nothing romantic there. But I do remember worrying the show was going to swerve on that and do something that felt out of place. But how did you feel, though? Were you kind of like, hey, these kids can make a go of it? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating that, and I know I'm going to be jumping a little bit, but there's like the thing with Harry where he has like the affair in the office, and it just kind of feels like weird. Like, not weird in the way that I think the show necessarily wants it to be. Like, it kind of feels like that's something that Matthew Weiner wanted, and the writers were like, I don't know, this doesn't really seem that great. And he's like, I'm the boss, this is what we're doing. And I could kind of see him, like, also maybe wanting Joan and Don to get together, but they're like, well, we can't have, like, everyone having affairs. He's like, you're right. Let Harry get his rocks off.
Yeah, it's true. In the commentary, yeah, he says that for him, it really is just these two people kind of just caring about each other.
Yeah.
He said Uppendahl was the one who made the comment of like, yeah, people really don't want us to make them get together. So I think there is a self-awareness there, or awareness they have of like how other people read the show. And they like that Don has this kind of platonic relationship with someone who's age appropriate, who is kind of his match. But, you know, not to put words in their mouths, but to me, it always felt like a brother-sister sort of thing. You know, to me, they feel like two sides of a very similar coin in the sense that like they've lived two very different trajectories. But for Don and Joan, I think both of them have this kind of fixation on this like American dream mentality that both of them understand they can never perfectly have, either because they're too old for it or because they tried to do it and it blew up in their faces for reasons that have to do with both themselves and the choices that they made. And that's why I think there's some kind of symmetry there. Like there's a mutual respect there between the two of them.
Yeah, I mean, I never really saw that as like an avenue to be explored, which is fascinating because it was something I was planning to bring up in our next episode anyway. So it was kind of fortuitous that it happened in this one because like you were mentioning at the beginning of the episode, HBO Max, since the show is now streaming and that's how I watched it, more interest has kind of been renewed in the show and people talking about it. And one thing I saw semi recently was like there was some speculation during the time, like there were like magazine covers with John Hamm and Christina Hendricks together, and there was like sort of more of a like build up to like, are they going to get together? It's like they were kind of teasing it, I guess, at the point. So like when you watch this episode, I imagine for the first time, you're probably more in suspense of like, oh, is this it? This is the moment. But like watching it now, like, you know, in retrospect, I never really got that sense of like, you know, they're like hook up. Like I feel like I'm watching it and I feel like, yeah, these are two people who are both too similar and too different. Like Joan isn't really Don's type from what we know of his like interests, but like also I think he just like sees her too much as a peer, and also I think just like has too much respect for her to really like want to do That, but I think that interaction with them at the bar is fascinating because like you can tell like if they really wanted to, and maybe if they had a few more libations, like they could, you know, indulge and, you know, it would make sense. And, you know, like they're kind of great for each other, but, you know, it's not something they feel like they need to do or should do. And yeah, I agree with you. Like, I think the brother sister kind of dynamic, you know, like Dawn's just kind of taking care of Joan during this rare sort of sensitive moment in the office. And it's like kind of an oddly sweet yet sensual kind of
Yeah.
interaction. Yeah, I think it's you know, it's definitely some of the highlights of the episode for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just fascinating that to learn in retrospect that there was, in terms of publicity and like, I guess with like, you know, Entertainment Weekly or whatever, there was, I guess, this idea that they were going to get together. And I guess they could still. I mean, I don't know, but I never got that vibe that that's where it was going.
Yeah, Emily St. James made the comment in her write-up where she was kind of saying, oh, but it feels like the show wants you to think that they could, you know, and that it's like maybe trying to play up that intrigue a little bit, even though they would never do that, right? But yeah, so the other thing too is that I think it's telling that Don doesn't feel guilty for spending time with her. Like he brings her up to Megan. He's like, I had drinks with Joan. It's like, I think that lack of like, I should hide this also kind of proves that out, that there's nothing really romantic there. And you know, things are still pretty solid between him and Megan in that respect, in the sense that he's clearly not showing an interest in, like, we already got that episode where he was like dreaming about like what an affair would be. And it gave him, you know, when he was sick, you know, like we should have recorded it. I could have gone method for that episode, clearly. But yeah, I like those scenes. I especially like seeing Don, like it's always fun to see him like in the car dealership thing, you know, because of his experience of being a car salesman, like how he can just kind of work that room so easily. There are a lot of like kind of crowd pleasing moments in this episode. What for you worked the best though in this episode? Like of the plots, which one did you find yourself kind of being the most interested, or the most kind of like, this is really the focus?
Yeah, well, real quick, I just wanted to ask you, like, something I thought about during that scene with like the spaghetti and all that is like,
yeah,
we've seen, you know, Don is, you know, from this season onward, has always been more upfront with Megan and been more honest, like you said, with the Joan thing. But I feel like if he was with Betty still, he wouldn't even like, you know, be upfront in that respect. Like he would probably just say like, I was out, or, you know, wouldn't even, or she probably wouldn't even ask him. So if he was with Betty, do you think he would have gone ahead with the affair? Like, do you think it would have been something he would have indulged just for the hell of it?
Well, I think my opinion, and this has nothing to do with what comes later in the show, mind you, but I think the way he is with Megan now is not that different from how he was with Betty. And I think there are big differences, mainly because Betty got pregnant very quickly. And so there are huge differences there. But otherwise, I think Megan is different from Betty in the sense that Megan, like, she does stand up for herself, you know? She does kind of like push herself to sort of, you know, be a little bit more direct, a little bit more of like, you're going to sit down, you're going to eat this, in a way that I don't think Betty ever would, right?
Right, that's what I mean. I feel like he would want that sort of like, you know,
he wants
motherly kind of premise, not like the like, whatever, I don't care what you do, I'm sad sort of thing. I think he would want someone to be like, you sit down and have dinner with me.
Right. He saw Betty as a doll and a playhouse that like he could just like pluck out of the playhouse whenever he wanted, but it bothered him when she would come out of the dollhouse on her own. Whereas Megan, he sees as a little bit more of like somebody who is at his level, like, which is unfair to Betty, to be clear. It's dehumanizing to her. But I think it's just like that plays into Don's misogyny, you know, and how he just doesn't understand that, you know, Betty deserved to be treated with way more respect than she was. He really wronged her, but it's one of those things that I don't think he has even come close to reckoning with, truly.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, that whole dynamic at the dinner table, because, like, I think that's what Don wants. I think he wants someone to be direct and, like, kind of scold him a bit. But, like, that whole scene, he's, like, kind of, like, holding back, like, a laugh, it looks like. He's, like, you know, like, she's like, sit down. He's kind of like, oh, okay. You know, I guess this is what we're going to do. You know, I'm going to get my spaghetti with no sauce.
He's also drunk. And he's like, Ham plays drunk so well, you know, with like the little lamp and like moving it and stuff.
Right.
Anyway, so back to the question though, of the various plots, I was curious which one were you the most engaged with, you know, as you were kind of watching and clicking along with this episode?
I feel like we kind of talked about them already. I feel like the stuff with Paul Kenzie and the stuff with Joan and Don are the most interesting for me. I feel like I don't know, the Lane stuff, it feels very abrupt. I guess we haven't really focused on it much this season. It kind of feels very like written in to be like, you have money problems now. This is something that's going to probably be relevant for the rest of the season. It's like, okay, I kind of feel like you could have been a little bit more like gingerly with like introducing this, but at the same time, like I recognize that's like, okay, this is episode 10. We kind of need to have the build up to the next like 3 or so episodes before the season wraps. So it's probably going to be a big component with the Jaguar thing and Lane being sneaky and stealing money and whatnot. My only disappointment with that thing is just that I was kind of hoping Lane's dad would come back and be like, you didn't pay your taxes. And he's like beating him up.
Jeez.
And then like,
I want to see some abuse on this show.
No, that's not what I mean. Like in a goofy sort of way, not like like realistic sort of way. Or like
goofy violence,
Lane just like, I was thinking maybe we could spend the time here at Christmas. And then Lane's dad pops in through the wall like Kool-Aid Man, like, not go to England for Christmas. And then like,
hey, give Lane a cane.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of tidbits early on in the season. I think it was the second episode where we did get a little bit of like Lane having money problems. There is the whole subplot with like the mobster girlfriend thing. And even in Signal 30, I think there were like small hints that like money was getting tight, like little pieces of dialogue. But to your point, I mean, that was a while ago that those episodes, and we did have a long gap in between. And so I get what you're saying. I think people who binge the show would probably disagree because they probably wouldn't notice the passage of time as quickly.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, I think we spent more time on the season than the year that eclipsed the episodes between Christmas episodes. So, I mean,
there you go.
Yeah.
But it turns into this whole scheme. And I do find it like, it's like a comedy of errors in which he tries to get out of this. I really like the scene where he forges the check. And in the commentary, they kind of get into like how Uppendahl did all this. Weiner wasn't there for it. And Weiner actually like watched it after the fact and was really impressed with the music choices, the cues, how they got Lane to do the handwriting. It's all very meticulous and it is really tense. And it all, of course, leads to the shoe dropping at the end of the episode where he realizes like he's screwed. And I do think it plays into that anxiety of like the holidays when somebody is in a huge financial situation that contrasts so much with like the spirit of the season and people are giving gifts and it's supposed to be a happy time going into the new year. Well, now we're going into 1967 and Lane's in a lot of trouble. And it's it could be pretty rough for him if he doesn't figure out what to do next.
Yeah, I mean, the forgery thing was fascinating for me because there's a sort of like parallel going on where it's like he's forging and signing over Don's signature, which in itself is a forgery because that's not his real name. So anytime that he signs, he's not really doing his own signature. He's doing another person's signature. So that's like a cool, fascinating thing. But
and his life's a forgery. We saw last season that what he really wants is, he's like obsessed with being this image of what people think he is. But like the dude dated a Playboy bunny, like he's obviously, in the beginning of this season, like he has these kind of more vulgar tastes and he's constantly pushing them down. And so, yeah, of course he's going to be duplicitous. Like that totally makes sense.
Yeah. But the thing that Zolarsites brought up that I didn't really think about, and I was curious to hear your thoughts, is that he kind of implied, or I don't even think he implied, I think he said outright that he does it so smoothly, the forgery, that this may not be the first time that he's done something like this. Like he knows to like put it over the light and like check, I didn't really get that sense, but was that something you caught?
I wouldn't say specifically the forgery, but the idea of being duplicitous, yes.
Well, sure. But I think he was referring to the actual like copying signature.
I would liken it to The Godfather. Okay. That moment when Pacino is like able to hold the lighter and it's smooth, where everybody else is kind of panicking around him. It doesn't mean that he's been in the situation before specifically, but I think there is like a familiarity he has with doing something like this or decide like doing something so monstrous because deep down, it doesn't really affect him as much as it otherwise would maybe on somebody else. And I like this other detail that Weiner brings up where like they wanted him to like when he shakes the check to make it feel like he's saying goodbye. Like goodbye to like where he was before this moment, because it's clearly like it's a stepping stone, there's going to be consequences to this action.
Yeah. And I mean, I love that there's like no music, no cheesy kind of like song that's playing. It's just like in the moment and it feels very present. And yeah, it kind of respects that. excuse me, that whole
Sorry,
idea
I'm
of like,
getting you sick.
no, I like that it respects the idea of like, we are watching somebody change and we're not going to like,
Yeah.
put
They're
too many
cross a
airs on it.
threshold.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the Lane stuff is very interesting, but I get what you're saying in terms of the abruptness. I think there's plenty of validity to that observation for sure. So I guess that means we can just get into the meat of the episode for a lot of people. One of the most memorable bits, the Hare Krishna of it all. And one of the interesting things that I'm curious, like how much you know about the Hare Krishna movement and all this stuff. One of the things they brought up in the commentary is that they had to do a lot of research. Specifically, the place in this that they film it in is called Matchless Gifts, and it still exists. And this was the time, like 1966. This was like the beginning of this movement. And so they had an opportunity to kind of like really like kind of do a story around something at its very beginning in a way that's still kind of historically accurate, which I think is kind of interesting. And it's something that still exists today. But I'll admit, I don't know a ton about like the Krishna stuff, aside from like, I guess, more culturally observable
Yeah.
things.
I mean, I just know it's very like New York 60s, but I don't know anything actually. Like I've only seen like scenes like this in other movies and shows where it's like people recreating it or parodying it or whatever. I was excited and nervous when that scene happened because I was excited because like this is a totally radical kind of departure for the show. We've never seen much of a scene like this, and we haven't seen Paul Kinsey in a while. What's this going to be like? And there was a part of me that was like a little nervous in the sense of like, is this going to be like if they just like got Allen Ginsberg and it's like, hello, I'm Allen Ginsberg and I'm going to read Hoot, and it's just like, okay, like, is it going to be a little too like corny and on the nose? Because there are a couple scenes like that in the first season. And like Matt Zoller points out in his book, this is kind of, in some respects, kind of like a return to the energy of the first season in some respects. But no, I think it's just fun, and it didn't feel like too forced or corny for me. At least I don't know how you felt about it, but it was a fun scene, and it's just also just kind of nice.
They did their homework,
Yeah, and it's just nice to see. I know you're not the biggest fan of Harry, and I can't say I am either, but it's kind of nice to see him like loosen his tie a little bit and be silly and like kind of like not his stuck up self for once.
Well,
a little bit. Yeah.
I mean, he had something stuck up, something. But yeah, y'all don't see this, but Will's eyes bulged. He's like, I can't believe Jon would say something so perverse. There's a moment in the commentary where, they talk a lot about all this stuff, and it was really cool to listen to. One of the things they brought up is like they did have experts on. They tried to really be specific to what it would have felt like, what it would have looked like. The people in this movement, like in the crowd, that it would have been some business people, would have been people in kind of like dressed up like Harry, They also, like when they were doing the boards, they called this Harry Krishna as like the working title of this like plot, which I thought was perfect. And I think it's in the actor's commentary, I really liked listening to Rich Sommer talk about this. He's like, we were in there forever. It was like 30 minutes of doing the chant, he said, and he was like, it was going on forever and ever. So like when you watch him kind of like exhausted and all that, it's like it's real. Like they actually were put through that apparently because they wanted to get shots of like all the different angles, and they really wanted to capture it. Yeah.
I have to also imagine it's just like, especially with the lights and, all the actors, and he's like wearing some kind of stuffy clothes. It has to be like so hot in that room.
Yes. Yeah. Even if they had shot it around Christmas time.
Yeah. That's not even accounting for Paul's main squeeze being all over Harry.
Yeah.
A little bit hotter if you.
That's Anna Wood. Plays Lakshmi Bennett. Anna, you might recognize Anna Wood from the show Reckless. I actually have her other stuff right here. She was in the film Chronicle.
Oh, she was?
Yes. She played Monica.
Okay.
And she's been in a bunch of TV. The Following, Good Wife, Law and Order, you name it. Yeah. So regular TV actor. And I thought she was really good in this. She really sold like her role here, and this kind of like character who's sort of trying to do two things, which is sort of like protect and exploit Paul at the same time. Yeah. And I thought there was like some interesting nuance there, and I totally buy that Paul would get wrapped up into something like this. But did you feel like this was kind of abrupt? Like, did you feel like this was maybe a little out of place for the character?
Well, I mean, I think I kind of talked about it a little bit already, but I don't know. It felt very like, and I don't want to assume it's Weiner, but it felt very much like somebody was like, yeah, and then they're like, this is gonna happen, and like the way that even Weiner kind of, or not Weiner, Zoller kind of points out that like the scene itself kind of feels like it's like writing its own criticisms into the plot in a way that doesn't feel like it's actually addressing them, but rather just like trying to get ahead of the audience a little bit, of like Harry kind of asking the questions that the audience or the writer's room might be asking. And I kind of have to agree with that because it feels a little like, I don't know. I mean, I get why she does it in a respect, but it does feel like, I don't know, a little derogatory to have like her being like, I'm going to use my sexuality to, you know, in a way that I could see maybe they thought it was progressive, but it doesn't really feel
no, I
progressive.
think you're right.
Yeah.
I think it's Weiner. I think it's him kind of doing his thing in terms of being a little creepy and a little bit of like either unintentionally or inevitably sort of creepy with how he views sex workers or people who come from that background and just kind of like puts them in these situations. And like even Uppendahl kind of remarks a little bit of, he's like, well, you know, I think that there's something to a person like this, you know, doing what they can to try to, you know, maneuver in this world. But he did seem a little bit more hesitant about indulging that, I guess. It's a very unique thing to try to explain secondhand. So I would encourage anybody who has access to the commentary to listen for yourself, make up your own conclusions. But it did always rub me the wrong way, especially because like they have to go as far as like her sort of be like, take me this way, you know. I was like, okay, you know, two connotations there, I guess, which is that she doesn't want to look at him, which makes sense because she doesn't really want to do this, but also like, oh, we want to really like hyper, you know, push this or like make this, you know, I don't mean literally, but well, I guess that too.
I don't know. I kind of feel like obviously the commentary tracks are informative in a number of respects and they give you a lot of good fodder for conversation, but I feel like it would probably be really interesting to have like commentary tracks now, like when Weiner's not in the room and like we know more about what his work you know, situation was like, and we know more about who he is as a person. Like if they could be a little bit more unguarded and like they don't have to worry about their jobs and they can just kind of be like, yeah, I don't know, I didn't really agree with this decision. I thought Weiner was kind of being pushy about it. Or no, I don't know. Who knows if they would even be more honest, but I feel like there's, you know, every time you talk about the commentary, there's like several moments where you're kind of like, yeah, we're all kind of awkwardly laughing, but I don't know, we can kind of feel uncomfortable about this.
Exactly. You know, they brought up a few other things I thought was interesting. The storyline itself was introduced by Andre Maria Jacques Menton, frequent writers and producers for the show. And, you know, I already kind of mentioned they had a Krishna consultant for not just like the set design, but also the costuming, of course, and how just everything looks and feels. So Weiner did refer to like Anna Wood playing Lakshmi. He wanted the character to bring like complexity, sexuality, and darkness to the role. I think Uppendahl said that as well. Weiner did say that he feared the Hare Krishna sequence would seem like kind of a parody. I think he mentioned Dragnet at one point, but he said he was really happy with how it landed. He felt like it landed with more sincerity than that.
Well, that's kind of like what I was saying, right? Like I felt like it could have, you were watching and you were almost like, oh, is this going to be like some awkward kind of parody?
Right.
But then it ends up being, you know, pretty well done.
The chanting scene doesn't just have background actors, it also has some crew members of the show in there as well. Originally, Paul was going to be more skeptical of the Krishna thing, but they redid it, they reshot it to show that he's more genuinely devoted to it than they originally planned. And they wanted his motivations to be kind of complex, where he does believe in the movement, but he also sexually wants Lakshmi, or not just sexually, but emotionally wants her too. My read on that is I think that he kind of sees Lakshmi as, you know, someone like him, you know, kind of like lost in the wilderness, who was kind of saved by what they call it a cult. And the Krishna movement's been called a cult before over the decades. So that's a whole other can of worms we don't have to get into. I mean, it is kind of presented in that way where he's like in a cult and Harry's trying to get him out of it. So that's clearly like where they land. And I'm sure that that's like a very New York thing of like what to take away from that movement and what it means. So the Star Trek script was a real idea pitched by the writers to be intentionally bad, but they wanted it to be endearing at the same time. So they would kind of fit that Paul mold, I guess, which I don't know what about it was supposed to be endearing, but okay.
Well, I didn't realize the name of it until I read the chapter, but I knew there was an episode of Star Trek later in the run. I don't know if you're a Trek guy or not.
No.
I've seen the movies. I've seen a little bit of the show. I wouldn't call myself a Trekkie, but I have like mild familiarity with the mythology and stuff. And there is that episode I know where it's like the race of aliens that are, you know, half black, half white.
Right. Emily St. James brings that up in her write-up as well.
Yeah, and I believe, I didn't know it, but that episode is called Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. But I knew of that episode, and I knew it was like kind of I don't know if it's a popular episode, but it's one that's like kind of brought up for like, I think, meaning well and being, because the show is always sort of pretty progressive as far as, you know, race relations being explored in the 60s on television. Cthulhu obviously being a big part of that. But yeah, I thought that the episode that Paul was referenced or wrote was supposed to be kind of, I didn't think it was that episode, but I thought it was kind of supposed to be like kind of a nod to that. And then when Zoller Seiss like brought that episode up directly in his chapter, I was like, okay, so that was probably at least mildly intentional, but not. I like the idea of like the writers probably of Star Trek had a similar idea and probably just wrote it a little bit better to make it onto television. But like Kinsey probably wrote it like way more obnoxiously and clunkily and you know, probably meant well, but it was just like horribly written and executed.
I think it's interesting because like I didn't realize this too much in retrospect or even at the time. I do remember at the time being like, oh, it's interesting that the Paul storyline is with Harry, and who, you know, they had moments together throughout the show, but you can tell that one of the main reasons they kept it to Harry is because of their real life chemistry, like I was talking about before. And that actually did play a big role in them deciding to really give this, you know, this whole thing to Harry, really. Because like Peggy gets a quick thing where she talks about, she gets that fun joke about the AMP, which I think is very funny, where like, you know, like everyone's just kind of like moved on from him. But I think that they noted that like, oh yeah, our scenes would be really good with these two people. And there's some good lines here. I like the line where he's like, that solves the problem for today, but not tomorrow. I really like when Paul says, you know, sometimes I think Krishna doesn't even like me, which I thought was just like, I just wanted to give him a hug.
Yeah, I mean, I think that diner scene is fascinating in the sense that it kind of mirrors, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it does sort of mirror like some scenes with Don, not only like his interaction.
Like Don and Peggy?
Well, not only that, but like Don and his brother, like before he like commits suicide.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, like
they mentioned that in the commentary where it's like, because they were recording this like before the other seasons came out, but I think it was Rich Slover who was like, hey, don't worry, you know, Adam came back. If he could come back.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there is a part of Don that I think kind of wanted his interaction with Adam to be like this in a respect. I think he was maybe so caught up in his Don persona that
here's some money, get out of here.
Yeah, that the dick didn't quite come out, but it kind of feels like this is like what he would have wanted his like last hurrah with Adam to be if he could just be Dick and not Don, because Harry's just, you know, he's uncomfortably himself all the time. Like he can't be a Don because he can't be anyone else but his awkward self.
And I think the big difference, right, is that like, you know, Adam wanted his brother. He didn't want money. Well, what does Harry want? Or not Harry, Paul. Paul wants a fresh start. He wants validation, and that is the thing that Harry gives him. He's like, the money is just a means to what he really wants, which is living a life that is fulfilling. And that's been the thing. I think you would have been fine at doing advertising and stuff like that, continuing to be a cog, but I think it just violates too much of his self-image and how he really actualizes as a person. And that's why he's been fumbling around, because he still doesn't have that. He doesn't have enough emotional intelligence to understand himself.
Sure.
And this is kind of Harry's ultimate gift to him. It's one of the few things, and it's perfectly Harry, right? Because he does this thing that's like genuinely nice and caring right after he sleeps with his girlfriend, right?
And also, he's doing it because he can't be honest with Paul. That's the other thing too, is that like he's like helping and hurting him because like not only did he sleep with his girlfriend, but he's like, everyone throughout this episode is telling him like, just be honest, like tell him the truth. That's what he needs to hear. And he just is like, I can't do that. I'm Harry. Here's money. Go try it.
But I do believe that maybe Harry believes that he would stand a better chance in LA. I think Harry knows the business enough to understand that like he's not going to find what he's looking for in New York.
Yeah. I mean, you might be right in the sense of like, it's not like Harry really planned for his career in television. He just kind of fumbled into that. Like he was just trying to find an avenue for himself. And then he just kind of happened to like find this burgeoning empire that he could like maintain his status in the company despite always being incompetent.
That's exactly right. So yeah, I guess we've really gone through it. I can go through maybe some other trivia, unless there was anything else that you wanted to touch base on for the episode that we didn't get into.
No, I do think it's, I mean, just because we were kind of talking about like Adam and stuff, it's fascinating that like Don is also being genuinely caring, but like he can only be that in a materialistic sense. Like we saw that, we were talking about that with Adam, but also it's like basically more or less what he's doing with Joan. Like he's not fully listening to her. He's like, here's a fun ride in a car and like, here are drinks, you know, like it's like still sweet, but there's like a veneer to it in a way that like the moment with Harry, for all of its hangups, is way more unguarded and sincere.
Yeah, well said, well said. Yeah, just a couple other things to kind of sprinkle in here. If you think of anything to chime in, be sure to do so. But So Lane's financial trouble when it escalates and everything, in the commentary, they refer to it as the Hansard procedure, which is a real legal maneuver that's used to delay taxes. And so that's kind of what that specifically is. I don't really understand it. No, I'm not a lawyer. I just watch Suits.
I mean, we should probably also say don't do that.
Yeah.
Just for legal reasons. So maybe don't do that. Yeah.
And one of the other things that Lane does in this episode that sometimes, like, this went over my head when I first watched it, but when he makes the interaction with the banker, a chemical bank, to his friend Walt, he's BSing here. Like, what he's doing is not legal, because he kind of is making it sound like, oh, these are not just projections, but these are commitments. They are projections. He's getting that like extra line of credit by defrauding this guy. So he already kind of starts with some like real, gray area stuff to start with. And then in the commentary, they talk a lot about how one of the reasons he gets away with this is because people just see him as this, like, it's Lane. Like, he's so smart. He gets us out of every jam. Like, we can trust him. We can listen. His name's Lane Price. Anybody with that last name has got to know what he's doing.
I like that in the sense of like the whole Christmas bonus scene in the boardroom. Like, it's very clear that he's like fumbling and like awkward about it. But no one, I mean, they're like all kind of like confused, but they are just like, maybe Lane's just like stressed with the holidays or whatever. It's not like clear, like, oh, this guy's unwell and there's something wrong. Why does he keep pushing the Christmas bonuses?
Right. And they mention kind of to that effect. They mentioned that like the only person who would really understand what's happening here would be Bert. I would say Joan as well, but I think she's just not, but like nobody else totally understands how this stuff works.
Is it intentional that he made the meeting when Joan wouldn't be there, because Joan would just like call it out, because he's like, Joan couldn't be here for some reason,
there you go.
Yeah,
I think that's a totally good call out. Speaking of which, we do have the episode where Roger shows up in his Hawaiian shirt, which I thought that would be your favorite moment, because you love your Hawaiian shirts. Not a lot of Roger in this episode besides that.
I would have liked it if it was like a happy moment, but it was just so sad. I'm like, oh, Roger. And, like he's going to have this sad moment with his secretary, and then with Joan. It was just like, I love a happy Hawaiian shirt. I don't like a sad Hawaiian shirt. And you can take that to the bank.
I think we've seen Scarlett before, the secretary he flirts with. She's played by Sadie Alexander. But I think this might be her second or third appearance in the show as one of the secretaries. And I didn't have too much else. Weiner did say the whole fake marriage charade at the Jaguar dealership is one of his favorite scenes of the show so far. They talked a lot about how they really liked the way the bar scene was done, where you really see the transition from like what a bar during Christmas time in New York is like during the day, and as it like gradually becomes later in the day, people getting off work. And I always love when they add those details, they make it feel all the more kind of like real. And I assume you've been to New York City around Christmas time. You live closer to there than I do, but I know when I have, I can feel that vibe, just like a quick memory. It is a very unique thing for New York that I've never experienced anywhere else.
Yeah, I've been to bars in New York City around Christmas, I should say. Yes, that's true.
It's a wonderful thing. It's fun.
I was chuckling to myself when Joan is like, let's play some tunes, or whatever she says, and goes to the jukebox. I was like, oh, what song are they going to play? And they immediately cut, and they had to remember, like, oh, yeah, they spent how much money on that Beatles needle drop? So, like, probably Weiner's like, we're not spending any money on, like, you're not playing any song of note.
They had fun kind of making fun of Pete for how his speech flops, but then Don kind of comes in, and they refer to how like when he gives his speech, and it's really him finally reasserting himself in the company. He was on love leave before, and then he was kind of grieving Megan being gone, but then this is showing him like he's finally starting to care more. They reference this a lot through the episode, where they're kind of like, yeah, Don has been off his game. He doesn't seem to want to work. He doesn't seem interested in work, but something about what happened in between that play and his time with Joan in the dealership and what happened with him and Megan, he kind of rolls up his sleeves here, and he paraphrases Chairman Mao, which I didn't realize until they reference it. It's like, yeah, we wanted him to reference that, and it's one of those fun little things that you would only know if you were caught up on your Italian dictator or your Chinese dictators. So there you go.
I mean, and that's kind of intentional, because like Megan comes from like a Marxist sort of background. Her dad's like a huge Marxist, and I think that's part of the reason she was so enamored by the play. And like, like she never really saw the ad agency is more than like work, and that's why she was so willing to leave it. And Don, I think for some reason it never really hit him until that moment that like, oh, this is not just my work, this is like my livelihood, this is my life. So like that speech I feel like is invigorated by like him being like, what we're doing is important. Being with your family is bad on Christmas. Being good for work for British car is good. And everyone, rather than being like dismayed, is like, yes.
And we've seen that before because like the theme of the episode is, short-term solutions versus long-term consequences. That's obvious with the Lane stuff. It's also something we've seen before with, Don having these kind of like short-term, like if I get this thing done for work, that's great. But the long-term consequence, he loses his family. Right. And I think that's one of the tensions that's still kind of facing him today with Meghan, of like the decisions he's making and all of that. And also with Harry, it's a short-term solution for him to just give Harry money. The long-term consequences of, shipping off to LA, what's that going to be like? But also Paul references that as well when he's like, this solves today, but it doesn't solve tomorrow. And so I like how this episode ultimately coheres all that stuff together. I think it's pretty well done.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of shows that Don, he's maturing in the sense like he kind of knows he can't just like always flee from his problems. He's like, we got to be in the thick of it and get this stuff figured out now.
Yeah. I forgot to credit, we were talking Star Trek, and if I leave this out, Andre and Maria Jack Menton wrote for Star Trek. I think Enterprise.
Really?
Yeah, I totally forgot to mention that. Mm-hmm. So that played into what you, so not the original Star Trek, obviously, but they were Star Trek writers. And so when they came up with like the Megon Complex stuff, it was kind of, playing off of that. So yeah, sure. Fun stuff.
Sweet.
Stuff. All right. Well, I guess that'll do it for Mad Men. Very sad that Mike Overhulse couldn't make it, but at least we had Mike Uppendahl, to refer back to. Did a great job with the episode. We'll hopefully be back soon to talk about the next episode, which is called The Other Woman, which, who could that be? I don't know.
But all I can say is live long and prosper. Star Trek symbol.
See you, everybody.